Hi.
Hello.
Hello. I'm already recording. Is that okay?
I know. I'm like, oh, I better. Whoa.
Ah, it's too quick. I know.
Already.
I've been doing this kind of impromptu recording to just get the chat before the chat.
Sure. Cool.
Hi, Hayden. It's the first time I actually see you. Oh, you're mute. You're on mute.
Uh-oh.
Here I
Sound
am.
problem?
No, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
It's
good.
a little faint, but yeah.
Let me just check in real quick on what the settings are. Sorry about this.
It's okay.
All right.
Can you
My
just bellow with masculine thunder every time you talk?
No. I'll try. Let's see. All
I
right. Hopefully that helps. Is that a little bit better?
I'll turn up my volume.
speak a little bit more. Oh yeah, yeah. Hold on, say a little bit more.
Hey.
Oh, it's good. It's better
Okay,
for
good.
me. Is it okay for you, Rachel?
Yeah, I can hear it.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Good.
I have this fan behind me, and I had a recording with this fan behind me, and it's like this crazy halo. It's like this
Oh,
thing. Can you see
cool.
it?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like,
I like it.
but it's so hot. If I don't have it on, I melt. So it's okay. I'll deal with the
Right.
halo.
I'm okay with the halo. It's
Are you
okay.
okay with the halo?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's awesome.
It's all right. I
I'm
can get used.
um
As well with your earrings.
I'm so like happy to be here with you guys. Like seriously, I'm just so stoked to have this conversation. It's been brewing for a while, and first we were gonna have it at Greg's channel, but then he's super busy with the conference, and I was like, I want to have this conversation. So I just I think I might start by saying that I'd love us to have this as the first conversation and invite if you both are open to it, the notion of more conversations, that feels more relaxing to me, because then I feel if we open doors today, we don't really need to close everything today. And also, if something, because the things we're going to explore are so delicate and so important. Everybody that I tell that I say that I'm having this conversation, people are like, oh my God, this is so important. This is so important. So I feel a lot of care for this conversation. I feel I feel my heart in it, like deeply so. So I want to tend to it in the best way possible. And to me, what that means is not only, it's just tending to all of our needs and being really present to whatever is emerging from all of us. And that might mean that, I think that to me, it means that having multiple conversations, it affords me more generosity with my own, more generosity and even more courage, because then if something happens, it's like, okay, should we tackle that one next time? Or we can drop an email to each other and go like, you know what, that didn't sit so well with me, so let's explore that one. And I feel this is just too much that we're trying to convey. And I also know, just from being a human, that things unravel with time, and I'll probably have insights by listening to you both, and then I'll go like, I'm really curious about this, and vice versa. So I just wanted to start opening us up for that possibility, and just see how that sits with you both, and then I'll introduce you formally.
Yeah, that sits very well with me. I actually could feel myself relaxing as you were explaining, like kind of your approach towards this, and the like kind of the attitude and your intention with it. It's like immediately puts me at ease. So thank you for explaining that, and I'm all in for that. That sounds great. Yeah, makes a lot of
Yeah,
sense.
same. Definitely. Like that I just was like, oh, okay, cool. We can like just be in the space a little bit more.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Oh, beautiful. I'm so happy to hear, because then it relaxes me too, because I'm like, I'm sure I'll be inspired to to explore lots of things, but maybe we can just focus on some things today and then see where we go.
Mhm.
So now I'll introduce you formally. And as I shared on an email, I was like, you're going to be my first 2 proper introductions. And the reason why, because I talked with people before. I've been having these conversations for the past 2 weeks. Because the reason, so maybe I'll just frame Fine Line Full Circle. So that's the name of the project. And the reason being is, I think that these names and the shapes don't have any, they're not triggering, I suppose, for most people. I imagine it's a line and it's a circle. There's beauty in both. We need everything. And I was having this conversation with a friend of mine yesterday, and she was like, the image that I have is of this like this train. I think she was saying a steam train, or maybe a train in which the wheel and the circle, like the circle carries the line. And I was like, that's so beautiful. And so the sense is like, how can we navigate reality better? Like, so I was going to say, as men and women and everything that's contained within the gender expression, because to me is like, there's this massive spectrum of masculine and feminine in reality in the world. So yin and yang. And both of you with your lives have highlighted that actually this is not, you identified with a different one. So we're going to explore all of this, but I also want to honor that, for some people it might be 80% yin and 20% yang, or whatever it is, the configuration. And that to me just shows more color and variety in reality. But because there's a lot that has been missing in conversation, and the words don't allow us or afford us flexibility, it tends to get really confusing. So Fine Line Full Circle aims to explore the masculine and feminine polarities in life, like yin and yang, but in all ways, as much as possible, with conversation, with generosity, with space. And then hopefully we'll have not only like healing, because I don't even feel so, I was thinking in myself, my desire is not this to be a healing space, even though I think it could be, but it's more like a co-creative generative space. So it's like, what could it, like, if we allow ourselves here to be in generosity, so knowing that I see you as the whole of you and we have this agreement, what could be possible, so that's like where it's coming from, that place in me. And the reason why I haven't introduced people so far is because I was like, I don't want to introduce people with their CV. Like, it just doesn't, it doesn't work for me. But I loved what you both wrote about yours. So I'm going to read it because I love it. And then I'll just put my spin on it. So,
okay. Before we do that, I'm just going to lock the door because I'm actually at the office, and I could see like some random like client walking in the middle of this otherwise.
It's a good call.
Good. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. Maybe my toddler will wander in at some point.
Oh, that's good too. Toddlers walking in. When I was having the conversation with Jordan Hall, at the last minute, his daughter came in, and I was just like, I love it because that's the bit that we don't see, and that's actually also the point of this channel that's why I'm starting with the little chat being recorded, because it affords also a different entry point into people's psyches when they receive this conversation. It's not that we arrived here and it's like, So
yeah. And I appeared out from the darkness,
it's beautiful. It's like,
very emergent.
Very emergent, very fitting.
It's so weird. My camera, for whatever reason, it does that every time I logged into Zoom. It's just like, it's hilarious. So
it's beautiful. It's coming from the void.
Now everybody gets to see it. Yeah.
I'll go with you, Aydan, first. Aydan identifies as transmasculine and currently works as part-time beer brewer, part-time stay-at-home dad. He's making his way into the liminal web space and has appeared on the integral stage speaking with Laban Pascal on two separate occasions. His primary passion is in mending the human relationship with the world and its contents through reimagining ourselves as stewards oriented towards a post-anthropocentric worldview. I just love all of it. I'm like, oh my God, this is like the CV of the future. Okay. As part of this project, he's looking to design food systems as a generative ground for building communities more awake and aware of the environments in which we can thrive. Well, I love it. Do you feel you want to add anything to this, or?
Yeah, I mean, right now, it's super early in the project, but you know, part of the reason I actually mentioned it is because it actually does connect with gender for me in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like this kind of worldview that I'm working through. It's integrating some research that's been done on the idea that part of what afforded the human mind to basically expand was that there was metabolic efficiency that was provided through cooked food.
Mm-hmm.
And so the cooking of food released basically more nutrients, provided more of a broad range of ingredients to be able to use, and afforded people to be able to expand into areas where maybe they might not have had enough to be able to survive. And in this view, what's interesting is I'm kind of exploring this idea that there's this story that we have about man the hunter,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that needs to be paired with woman the taster, because it's not
Mm-hmm.
there's this interesting thing about women that on
Mm-hmm.
average their sense of taste is
Mm-hmm.
like high above that of men, and
That's
they're
really
actually
interesting.
yeah, and they're actually they're way more sensitive to kind of the off flavors that indicate toxins and basically any kind of dangerous chemical compounds that might have arisen from rotting or anything like that. So
Hmm.
it's essentially like my view is that I think that there's like this very unique way that we became human that actually informed how like basically was part of the process of gender becoming a thing. So
Hmm.
there was sex, there was sexuality through like the
Hmm.
primate, and
Hmm.
then I think gender came from sexuality into the human through a process something like what I've just described.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that gender roles are an extension of that to the
Mm-hmm.
culture and like the way that we inhabit kind of the division of labor through history over time. So
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm very curious now about what you just said. That's great. So great opening. I don't know your last name, Aydan. Do I have to? What's your? How do you introduce yourselves usually in these conversations or whatever? You're Aydan.
yeah, Aydan Connor.
Aydan
Aydan Connor.
Connor. Okay,
It's interesting because normally my Zoom actually has my last name
both.
on it, so I didn't even think of it. But
No, you know what I was thinking, because in the future this will become a podcast, not just YouTube. And I was like, oh, my podcast people will miss a lot because I haven't introduced anybody. There's no last names, but it's okay. I'll go with the flow to start with.
you just
So
put it in the description. You just put it in the
yeah,
description of the
yeah,
podcast. It's
that's
fine. Yeah.
yeah, I'll do that. All right. So Rachel, I need my glasses for that one. Hold on. Rachel is interested in the ways she can re-inhabit gender and live in wonder and aspiration within it. She's a transgender woman and hopes that her life as a walker between worlds can help reflect back on what gender is in our society and what it could be. She currently calls herself a gender realist, meaning simply that gender is not reducible to anything else. I like that. And a gender aspirationalist, meaning that gender at its best can help us become better versions of ourselves. She has done videos with John Vervaeke, Greg Enriquez, and several others in the liminal web. Her day job is in community mental health, and she loves music and coffee. Love it. Yes, here to you, Rachel. What, anything else that you want to add to this, or just spice it up, or?
Oh geez, I should add some spice to it maybe. I don't know. I find this topic like endlessly fascinating, and I kind of thought, when I'd sort of solved my own gender conundrum more or less, that I was done with it and I wanted to move on to other subjects. And it just keeps coming back. Like what Aiden's talking about right now, I'm already like, oh, and this and this and this, food and my sense of smell during hormone transition and
Hmm.
all kinds of stuff like that. And, just, oh, it's like, there's so much to it. And I think, I don't know, I'm just like let out of the gates because like,
Hmm.
it's like a not taboo subject for so long, in the circles that I frequent a lot of the time. And so, it's just really fun to sort of like for a while I was asking everyone I met, like, what is gender to you? What is it? Like,
Hmm.
how do you relate to it yourself? Do you love it or hate it? Do you
Hmm.
want things to be different and like stuff like that? Because we're all like such a part of it, right? Like it's a part of us and we're a part of it. And so anything we say about it reflects that. And so we're just kind of like needing each other,
Hmm.
we need this like web of people to really come to terms with it, I think. And I think it is important to do so. So yeah, it's just quite the journey.
It's what's coming up for me is that, so the piece that a lot of, maybe not a lot of people, but some people interpret as that maybe my relationship with Rachel, because we've been developing a relationship for the past year, I think.
Yeah.
And it's really lovely to get to connect with you more recently, Aydan. And because I do bring, part of my work has been to bring the menstrual cycle into awareness, like collective awareness, like systemic, really. Mostly because the circle, we don't understand the circle, and I'm like, it's a line and a circle, and to me it inhibits creativity. It's just like a circle is not a line; it's a circle, and then it's fine. It can be all sorts of different things too, but it also sees reality from within the circle. And so because I bring this, there has been some assumptions that potentially a conversation with Rachel would be like triggering or something, because apparently we're saying the opposite. And I was just like, my experience, it hasn't been that we're saying the opposite. My experience is that we care deeply for the same thing. And it's just, and we kind of help each other see different angles. And even through your comment, Aydan, just now about the sense of smell or taste, you said taste, right? And I was just taking to this, they combine.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, oh my goodness, like all of that, like to me, the how did you call yourself, Rachel? Edge walker,
I like to say walker between the worlds.
Walker between worlds, which to me, trans people have the capacity. Of course, you can see both worlds, you can see between the realms, and of, I don't know if that's the focus. I think that sometimes when people transition, maybe they want to let go of. So I don't know. That's something I want to explore. Because in this, when you were asking Rachel about asking people about how they experience gender, what I experienced being a woman, a cis woman, born with a woman, just like carrying on my life as such, is that a lot of women had never thought of that. So actually, that's not a conversation I have, which is already interesting in itself. Because I mean, I started having this conversation just much more so when I was like, hold on, the menstrual cycle piece is important. And do you notice it? Like talking to other women and then noticing that a bunch of them don't. And then it's like, oh, hold on. And then, so then that's an interesting thing in itself. But I think that being trans, what's fascinating to me when I was thinking about this conversation is that a lot of my relationships, I don't, that's not the point of it. Like I wouldn't say, I would, let's say if I met you, Aydan, and maybe your interest in food, our interest is something else. It's not because you're trans man or Rachel trans woman, but because of the interest we share, it's almost like what's salient, to use John Vivek's language, is this aspect of ourselves is like, oh, I'm bringing the menstrual cycle. Oh, you're a trans man. Oh, you're a trans woman. And of course, we have much more other things, but I feel that our connection through this could bring a lot of clarity, actually. Because even now I was just thinking, I share the cooking with my partner, but actually he's a much more pragmatic cook, much more like he's like dal, whatever, like he just, and I'm like, no, I'm the flowery cook, I'm like, no, more human, no, like, so I was like, oh my God, that happens. And if we don't talk about it in this more generous way, then we can collapse into like, oh, I don't know, the woman likes more the cooking, or I don't know, whatever it is that feels like, oh, this is actually such a deep honoring of the sense of taste and the sense of smell. I really appreciate that. It feels really interesting to me.
Yeah, that's an important distinction to me. I'm glad that you picked up on that, because it's like it isn't about like it. I worry because of the framing that I'm like kind of developing here, that people think that that's like the conclusion I'm trying to drive things towards, and that's not what I'm trying to say. I just think that this is deep history. Like this isn't about culture. This is about I'm thinking about like literally how what was the process that allowed us to transition from being social apes to being humans. And then so it's like it's so much less about like the gender roles that as they evolved over time in history. It's way more about like what was happening to these pre-human apes, that like how did they get to that point between, you know, when you look at chimpanzees now, like if you kind of try to picture where they're at now, and that there was a time in our history when we were there too, like there too, you know, what was the generative thing that allowed us to progress forward? And I just think it's an interesting way of considering, because it does feel like it would be intuitive for that to continue on. Like there's an interesting fact about the brewing industry, that before it was an industry, for centuries brewing happened in every household. In fact, there was such a thing as you know, floor malting was a process where you would take the grain and you would actually sprout it on your floor and you would malt the grain just in your house. This was all the job of the woman. And then there would be like, basically there would be maybe like eventually in the Middle Ages, there might be a woman who is in town who like makes the beer for a few people in town. But essentially, once it became an industry, the women were left out of it, and it became men's work. So it's kind of, it's interesting, because I just think, you know, we've seen the same thing happen with like when it comes to professional cooking, it became way more like men's work once it entered into that professional realm. But to me, you know, it's way more about the connection is way more about the nourishing, the like the sustenance, the pulling together of people, where, you know, there might not have been as much motivation for the tough men to be able to, you know, stay around. But then, you know, there was fire and there was food and it smelled good. And it was just like a little bit more enticing to stick around than it was to wander off. You know, like these are kind of like the things that I'm imagining in my head, as I'm
You know,
contemplating all this.
that's
Yeah.
interesting you say that, because like, you know, I just read Franz de Waal's book, Different Gender Through the Eyes of a Primatologist. And, you know, basically his one of his core statements in that book to me is that the typical primate society is a matriarchal web of relationships. And you know, we think about, oh, it's the alpha male chimp, right, or something, or alpha male gorilla, but like a lot of times they're kind of peripheral, like you were saying, they're like off hunting or fighting or, you know, whatever, bullying somebody. Okay, not to like be, you know, but like, you know, they're busy doing like the things that they're doing, and the women, you know, the females are tending to the young and having relationships and kind of like maybe tasting different things and seeing what's going on. So it's like that's kind of the core of the society. So it's interesting that in humans we have, it seems like, at least, you know, from that, like a more integrated society. And maybe I like this idea of like the fire drawing us into this circle and dancing around it
And like
and that kind of
it's
thing.
funny because, you know, we're Adriana, I don't know like how much of like Greg's theory you've gotten into, Greg Enrique's theory that you've gotten into.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I'm not super obvious, but you can educate me anytime. We can just, yeah.
One of the things that he discusses is that his kind of like way of framing the transition from, you know, pre-human to human. He frames it as like a propositional development of was it semantic
Justifications.
so well there's like the
Oh,
symbolic, semantic,
syntactic. Yeah.
syntactic, yes, yeah, that's what it
Mm.
is, syntactic language. So there was, you know, basically the question answer dynamic that was opened up, and he usually frames it as like something that happened surrounding hunting.
Yeah.
And I actually like I think that there's just as strong of an argument for that when it comes to cooking and to food.
Mhm.
Like, can you picture people sitting around, like, you know, people,
Mm.
pre-human people
Mm.
sitting around, and they're, you know, like they've got this potato, um, and they're like this kind of, you know, they're chewing at it. That's, I don't know,
Mm.
this isn't very good. And so they start kind of like they try like smashing it up a little bit. You know, like there's so many things. If you like what I picture is, you know how people will say like, oh, they look at like something like a sea cucumber, right? And they're like, who the hell was the first person to try sea cucumber? That is the most awful looking
Not
thing.
me.
Right? So like you have these examples of foods where you're just like, what happened? But I think this is a part of what made us human. I think this is a
Mhm.
part of what like the reason we don't know those stories is because
Mm.
they're so old, because they're actually like a part of our deep history. So like to
Mm.
me, I think when it comes to like the development of propositional language,
Mm.
you think about the extended process that some food processing takes. It
Mm.
might be a week, it might be 2 weeks. Like if you think about fermentation,
Yeah.
these are extended projects over time that like if you didn't have a way of like gesturing and like trying to explain like it, to me it makes total sense that it would have gone from gesture, you know,
Mhm.
like pointing at things
Mm.
like, oh, you mash it
Mm.
like this,
Mm.
like
Mm.
you kind of
Mm.
start there, and to me it makes total sense that that would evolve naturally to speech. And think about this too,
Mm.
because this is another element that just like, you know, we're talking right now, and this is
Mm.
popping up for me. It's already known that speech, like our facility with speech, was through the use of the tongue, which was developed through our mastication. Like the strength and the way that our tongue is able to move and manipulate is because of our chewing of foods,
Mm.
because it's part of the digestive process. It
Mm.
just, I don't know, to me it's like,
That sounds fascinating. I was just
yeah.
like, it's taking my yeah, I'm just fascinated by the whole thing. And I was just even reflecting on um when you were talking about how when it became an industry, it became women started being a part of it, like say brewing things or cooking. I was thinking, for example, I can totally sense that in my experience because I'm an intuitive. I'd say that that's the realm of the feminine. A lot of in these certain stuff is intuitive. So I cook with my senses. I am horrendous in recipes. I actually don't like it. I'm horrible, and I always swap things without much order. So it doesn't, I can't, so there's a lot of downsides to it because I can't reproduce it as accurately. Sometimes if it's a really quick dish for my kids, I kind of do it because then it's simple. But it make total sense to me. For like Bonita Roy often talks about being a feature and not a bug. Like whatever it is, she usually ties into like physiological or different like inclinations or what it is. She's like, it's a feature, not a bug. And even that thought, I was like, if I take my intuitive cooking produces, there's a lot of love in that meal and a lot of care, and I adjust with my nose and I'm like, it needs more of this, and it's really creative. Since becoming a parent, that's my creativity. When I couldn't do other things, I create in the kitchen. But I would be a horrendous chef of a restaurant because if I have to organize, like it's a completely different way of operating. I have to like be systematic and produce reliable, consistent dishes that taste the same and on a deadline. And so I was thinking, I'm tired just thinking about it. So I was just thinking that makes total sense to me. And I can also understand the frame that people might put on top of these things that then actually forget that's quite empowering to me to not cook at a restaurant. It's actually not this empowering. I don't feel disempowered by cooking at home. Now, if people place that as an oh, this is less, Adriana, you're doing less work, then it's like, oh, Then I'm like, then I think there's confusion in it, because instead of a lot of us going, actually, this is not less, this is great, for multiple reasons, and I mean economic reasons. But then we went, okay, this is less, so maybe I should just go there and leave my kids at daycare, whatever it is. So then there's a lot of confusion that happens there. So I'm really happy that you're bringing this, the flavor of the conversation, just to use the pun. And Rachel, did you want to?
Yeah, I like it a lot too, because it's just funny to hear, and I'm not like, I don't want to come off as like, those men and their ways or something like that. Like, I'm not trying to like start any kind of fight, but like, it's just, to me, to hear about like early humans, and it's always framed in terms of hunting. Like Aydan, you were saying, like, oh, early humans, like they were tracking and hunting, and this is how they developed, and they were fighting, and they were, and I'm like, sure, yeah, they were doing that. And they were also like nurturing and gathering up and cooking and tasting. And Neil Gaiman, actually, the author, did this amazing little short piece called The Mushroom Tasters, I think, or The Mushroom Hunters, with his then wife, Amanda Palmer, narrating it. And it's this gorgeous little piece on YouTube, and it's like about basically like early women as scientists, like, and they're doing like what Aydan said, like they're like, oh, and this one mushroom, if you eat it, it kills you, and if you boil it once, it still kills you, but if you boil it and then you dry it out and then you boil it again, then it becomes edible. And like, how did they figure that out? Like these were people gathering and nurturing and relating to each other, and like, hey, can you hold the baby for a second? And like, like all this stuff was happening. And it's funny because like we're just, and I understand like, there's historical reasons why there were a lot of men in the academic fields that kind of like worked on these theories and stuff, and that's great. But I'm just like, okay, but let's add in this other stuff now and start thinking about it. So I really appreciate that a lot. And just on a personal note, like, to just a quick aside, like when I started hormonal transition, like I was saying earlier, like my sense of smell like skyrocketed, and taste, and I got especially disgust for things. Like I'm like, our house really stinks. What is wrong with our house? Like it smelled, like anything that was off was like really off, is still really off. And things are more beautiful as well. But like, yeah,
I'm
with
curious,
flavor,
Rachel, do you feel that difference when you're taking estrogen? Have you mapped with the different hormones or not yet? Because well, you go, and then
yeah, mostly in general, like I am trying to cycle progesterone, and there's a few complications I'm having with it right now. But that's such a good question. Probably if I was a more astute listener to myself, I would notice like, oh, with the progesterone, this is happening or something. I would imagine it would, my guess is it would upgrade more, because that's like a strong pregnancy, late puberty hormone.
I'm very curious about that. It's very interesting, because a lot of the things in women's experience we don't check. So, and because there's a negative frame to some things. So for example, some friends of mine are very sensitive, the smell, very sensitive. So what you said, like, oh, my house stinks, this is actually like super useful, right? Oh, maybe there's mold, I need to clean, like you're saying, Hayden. But some things have been problematized. And I actually don't even think it's out of malice. There is an amazing, and I think it's, who said that to me? I don't know if it was Lehman or John Hall. Like somebody said something like, maybe it was Lehman, saying that men in his experience have more of they can switch off so many other things and move with what's required. So that is amazing, and maybe history shows that. But then what happens is, if we don't see the other as also valuable, the other becomes a nuisance. So my friends that have those sensitivities, they're like, oh, I'm a pain in the ass, because I smell too much, or I'm too sensitive to noise, or which is information. Again, it's a feature, not a bug. And I'd say them so Bonita is doing amazing work. So I'll have a conversation with her, because her language helps bring nuance to things, which is very helpful. But one thing that she's distinguishing, for example, emotions. So she distinguishes dispositional state. So the dispositional state, the affect stream that then has, becomes an emotion. And the dispositional state of a woman is what in my experience is what cycle, like what I can track, like I can say I'm more emotional, but that's lazy, like not lazy, it's just I didn't have the frames. But if I actually go zoom into what's going on, my sense of my capacity to smell, to hear, to see, it gets heightened in different times of the cycle, and that means I get very overwhelmed by so much. There's so much data, and therefore there's less capacity to translate into words. Like being wordy becomes really hard. It's an effort to my cognition, and therefore I get triggered by people that demand that of me because I can't do it. But I didn't have all these. This was just like overwhelm and not capacity to explain. So it's over the years and over lots of like conversations and then teachings and different things and noticings, I go like, oh, that's what's going on. So that's why I describe in my conversation, I think with Greg, I didn't even have that clarity then when I had the conversation, which is a year ago now or more than that, which is, I was calling what Gebza talks about, like, the magic structure of development, or I was just trying to make sense of what is it when I'm bleeding. It's not this. It's very clearly different to when I'm ovulating. It's very, very clearly different. But then science just often just gives me very dry description and not poetic enough and not stretchy enough so I can fit all the realities of people that I see in. So as I hear you both, I'm like, oh, it gets even more nuanced because I'm gonna start noticing now my taste and my like particular things throughout the cycle, which feels really interesting to me again. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, and I'm gonna do that with my artificial cycle now too. Like I definitely can, glimpse that with like higher estrogen levels, like an intensity that's just like electric in my skin or something. So yeah, I'll have to be more mindful.
I'm curious with you, Aydan, about your taste and smell after your transition, and how is that? Because you work with that and you have a lot of awareness, and also maybe the transitioning gave you awareness, or the working with it. Like I'm curious about this.
Yeah, I definitely, I don't think it's in my head that my sense of taste and smell declined after transition. Yeah, which is unfortunate given my work, but but it's okay. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, and yeah. But I definitely I had a noticeable decline in terms of like the nuance of it kind of shifted for me. Um, like there a really good example is in the past I'd be able to taste like, okay, well this is like guava and papaya and mango, and like list a series of, let's say, tropical fruits. Now it's like I'm like, okay, it's tropical fruit, but is it guava? Yeah, maybe. Okay, yeah, and papaya. Okay, maybe I can get there, and like I almost have to like really. There's just like not. It used to be much more automatic for me. It used to be much more like fluid of a process, and like there's always a learning curve when you're first starting to get used to going through that process where like there's an association. You have to kind of like learn how to be extremely attuned to like your immediate reaction to like whatever you're smelling or tasting, and kind of roll with whatever association you get from memory. Because one of the things that's weird about the sense of smell is that it goes through the like more emotional parts of your cognition, then it goes to, and then it goes to like propositional, but there's a seat to it where it's like it's rooted in memory and like episodic memory. So like if you have like a picture called up in your mind from like from an aroma, like you should lean into it because it's actually probably showing you a detail about what you're smelling that will actually lead you to like a further insight about it. So yeah, the nuance of it kind of like dulled, and I think I think it's hard to track whether my sensitivity to off flavors changed at all. It's like it's definitely the primary like focus when you're a brewer. You want to make sure, if nothing else, if you
Mm.
can't describe like what it is, it's one thing, but if you can't detect something that's not right, that's another thing entirely. Uh,
Hmm.
but yeah, I think like another way to kind of put the shift is that it's like now I can kind of like I can still identify when the beer tastes right to me. Like it's if
Mm.
it's a particular brand that we make all the time and I'm regularly tasting it, I can detect if it tastes right to me. But I wouldn't. I'm not as good at describing what right is. Does
Oh my-
does that
No,
make
it's amazing. Can I
Mhm.
add one thing? And
Yeah.
I'd love to. It's fascinating to me. It's my I'm just like sparking with stuff happening because I was fascinated by the sense of smell because I lost my sense of smell when I had COVID for a whole month.
Mm,
Not just for a little bit, for a whole month. And because my kids go to a Rudolf Steiner school and the senses are very, very deeply Steiner wrote books on the senses and from the spiritual perspective. And I mean, he was very prolific, so he wrote all sorts of different things. So I was researching. It was really hard to find stuff on the senses online that was deep, but I found some stuff on his work that was talking about the sense of smell being the root, from some perspectives, being the root to morality, because it's like the first thing. So, for example, it's the first no that you have. Like if you enter somewhere that the smell is foul, you go like everything in you shuts down, right? So you're like, no, I don't like it, and then it becomes like it's bad, it's mean, or whatever it is later. But I just like what sparked for me as I heard you saying that your sense of smell dulled, and
mhm,
Rachel saying that her sense of smell increased, and me going, even like occasionally I go like I try to understand patriarchy or the line, the overpowering line through different lenses where there's no judgment on top of it. There's just like, what's happening? What are the masses of misunderstandings a long time and space that happen? And then we put story onto it
mm,
and wrong story, like Chinese whispers. So I was just thinking, when I lost the sense of smell, the way I felt was I felt my empathy was gone. I couldn't empathize with the world in the same
Wow.
way. Like, of course, if I had it forever, I would learn and different pathways would be developed. But because they weren't at that time, I remember that, and as I was trying to describe to a good friend of what I was feeling, I was saying, I'm not penetrated by the world in the same
mm,
way. And I can't, like the world is in me and I'm in the world, it's not there in the same way.
mhm,
And as I hear you, Aydan, I was like, I can see how if that's a little bit dulled down, then now that I feel this penetration, I could
mhm,
move forward with things without feeling burdened by things in the same way. Therefore, I can see like the line just asserting itself because it's like less penetrate. I mean, I'm making a lot of connections there that might be not entirely accurate, but I'm just going like,
Keep
oh,
going.
that's
yeah,
that's interesting. That's an interesting exploration
Mhm.
because
yeah,
I I had a friend of mine telling me their deep story. Usually I'll be crying with her, I'd be smelling her, I'd be, but I wasn't. I was just more like,
hmm,
and that's when I noticed. I was like, oh, where is my empathy? Oh my goodness. And because I know how I usually feel, I could compare something I had something else to compare
mhm,
too. And then I also noticed that my sense of empathy came back when my smell came back. So I was already, because like when I smell the lavender in my house or the rosemary, it's like you said, the memories, like I can start crying with it. It's like my whole of my body. Whereas, when I was smelling rosemary, I could barely smell it as my sense of smell was building up. It was not doing that to me. So it was my relationship to reality became more pragmatic. I could see it
mm,
being more
yeah.
pragmatic, so yeah,
That's
that's
very interesting.
interesting.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating experience that you had that to be able to compare in this context.
Mm.
Yeah.
I mean, only now offered by both of you, it becomes even more fascinating because it's like
Yeah.
you're both giving me more texture to it, you know?
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have like an analog that comes from my work
Mm-hmm.
where and this is a sporadic thing because it's actually just the nature of the work environment. So we have all sorts of pumps and pieces of equipment that are just running all the time, making noises. There's an air compressor. There's just all sorts of machinery making all sorts of noises all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and they're because of all the activity in there, a lot of hot water, a lot of steam. We have this giant industrial exhaust fan that is able to basically like pull all of the air up and out of the brewery. Um, it's awesome, except that it's deafeningly loud,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and I get like the thing that will happen to me is like if that fan is on, like it's like I'm on edge because I don't because all of a sudden I've lost this feedback from the sounds of the equipment. Like I don't realize how
Mm-hmm.
much I'm taking information in from the sounds of the equipment
Mm-hmm.
until like this thing is like basically blowing all of that out of the water. So I'm just constantly like, oh wait, is that pump cavitating? Like, oh, is this um, and yeah, so I could see like the level of disorientation that could potentially cause to kind of
Mm-hmm.
your ability to like interact with the world, and especially if it's something that's just kind of so automatic. Like that's the thing about the sense of smell, like so much
Mm.
of it is just so automatically happening as like a background noise
Mm-hmm.
now that like if we don't, unless we like call it forth as something that we really like pay attention to, we might have like those severe like we might have severe reactions and not even realize that's what's happening. Like you might be disgusted when you go into an environment, not even real like it's just kind of a
Mm-hmm.
sense that you have, but
Yeah.
it's like, so it's interesting to look at the senses when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to kind of how we inhabit the world, like how we
Mm-hmm.
live in the world.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm super.
fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
No, you go. I was just gonna say that Bonita Roy did a whole module of her pop-up school on perception, like physical perception, then to move into interior perception, which is like when you imagine something that's a perception. So she's slowing things down a lot, and it's very helpful because a lot of things that happen automatically, as you say, um, I'm noticing a lot of insights just by having the time. Just,
Mhm.
but sorry, Rachel, that I interrupted you again.
No, there's just like, yeah, there's like all these interesting little paths to go down, like this whole smelling and being penetrated by the smell. And you and I have talked about boundaries for women
Mm,
being sort of different than men a lot of the time. Like,
yes.
I mean, or at least like the idea that we have of like, oh, you set this hard boundary and you just don't let, you know when you're, and it's like, I'm like, no, it's like a dance that like might be in part of me at one point and then outside and then like, but it's like not worse if it's in me, necessarily, but I have to know how to like you have to like feel it's an art form, right? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
just like, and that's how it feels to me now more than ever with hormones, but like it was more the realization of like who I was, like that
Mm-hmm.
really, it's like that. I was like, oh, I don't have to like hold this,
Mm-hmm.
firm like castle wall around me or something. And I feel like I'm coming off as like really anti-masculine in this conversation so far, and that's not at all my intention. Like,
No, I
okay,
don't.
cool.
Not for me. I don't think you are. And
Okay.
actually, I was gonna say that my experience of being with the two of you is really fascinating to me because I'm gonna throw this in here. It's like I experience you as a man, Aydan, but fuller. Like there's a full. I don't mean that in a bad way, guys out there, like to the other people watching. And Rachel, the same to you in the in the other way. It's like it's almost like it's a bit trippy even because it's like you're a guy that I you understand me from the inside. Like it's weird. It's a
It's
weird
weird,
thing.
right?
And Rachel, you're like a woman, but you understand what it was to be a man. So it's like it gives you a perspective that a lot of um like women don't have. And
Mm.
I imagine that my projections, like I was as I'm saying all that because when you're saying I come across as being not nice to guys, what came to me is like when you inhabited a man's perspective, it almost allows you to speak from a knowing. It's different if you're me. You know what I mean? It's almost like it's a different thing. Because then I think that again we're separating things. You're not. I don't experience you as speaking from a judgment. You're speaking from a like, I experienced that and it changed, and I can, it's different. Whereas I noticed that for me, just recently, when I went to the Rebel Wisdom, closing gathering, and it was beautiful. I mean, I was really tired and jet lagged and sick. So I was in a space that I actually really needed nurturing. Like I actually needed to be held, but the conference wasn't like that. It didn't have the feminine. It was beautiful in lots of different ways, and I felt nurtured in different elements. But I think that because I have never tasted one way or another, like Aydan now being like not just inhabiting like with testosterone, but actually inhabiting the world as such. So how do you negotiate about it? Like how do you feel them? But how do people treat you? Like what's the response of the world in you? So all of that, I don't have that. I've never had that. So what I noticed is that to me, and I projected a lot of authority in men and I didn't even know. And I know that a lot of my female friends do that just because they never tried the other, and they actually can't feel into the insecurities of men because it doesn't look insecure from over here. Like it looks very secure. I was just, is it your daughter? Is it your daughter, Aydan? Is it about? But
Sorry about that. Yeah, that was my son.
oh, it's your son. Oh,
Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah.
You're on mute, so I couldn't hear.
Sorry.
So I think that for me it was very important to start the process of deconstructing those projections because they weren't helpful, not to me as a woman, but also to men, because I held them to a place that actually I'm just basically saying that I'm seeing my role and in patriarchy. Like I'm noticing what my part to play. I don't mean to say that triggering in any other way, because it doesn't again come with judgment. It comes from a place of like, oh, so when a guy says that he knows, doesn't necessarily mean that he knows. It's just there's a agency or that is quicker and checks less with other people. Like I'm just trying to understand how it operates in the world and how I take that to be, because I actually believe that, like, and then I shy away from showing myself because I'm like, oh, if you know so well, like I don't, so you might as well go. And then later on, it's like, oh, I actually didn't know. Oh, you didn't, but why did you sound so convincing? like, oh, it's because just that's how we speak. I'm like, oh, okay, then like it's just like different collective agreements, and I'm like, can we just make them visible, because we're kind of abiding by different things there. And I think that's part of a lot of what's happening.
Yeah, one of the ways that I remember Rachel and we just had a separate conversation at one point where basically the distinction was that men tend or masculine is edgy and the feminine is fluid. So there's something about that kind of is very much in alignment with where you're coming from, what you've kind of like been able to pull together from so many different angles. And I think in our email exchanges at one point there was a point where I was talking about like the difference of energy that I felt between prior to having testosterone and after, and that it was like a roller coaster. When, and every month I had a very, very strong cycle. And so it was something that, I could tell when I was ovulating, I would get PMS. I would have everything was very fully functional, and the hormones along with it, that roller coaster was very strong. And since going on testosterone, it's like a current of energy. It's just it's just a current of energy. There's something that's like and so it's very interesting that like you have kind of come to this symbolism to be able to frame these conversations. you know?
Super cool.
Yeah. So it definitely, like, there's a lot that seems to be aligning. And I think, like, one of the distinctions that I like to make when I talk about gender is that it's like there's there's something so different about like your interior felt sense of gender, your like the way you're like kind of like showing up and responding to people in the world, your expression of gender. There's like something about that feels very dynamic, because I think like it can be kind of confusing for people when they see, like, for example, a very masculine presenting woman who has no identification with being masculine at all, you know, like in terms of gender identity.
Yeah.
And so, like, you know, you have things like that, but that's because there is a difference between this, like, a style, a hairdo, clothes you wear, and this interior felt sense of like how you're interacting with the world. So, like, your sense of like connection, where those boundaries lie or don't lie. And I just think, you know, there's that element. And there's also kind of like the distinction I like to make too is that just very much in the same lines that you were saying, you know, most people are kind of like on a spectrum, even if they don't necessarily recognize it. That,
Yeah.
like, there's kind of like masculine energy, but you know, you can still be just as much of a woman, with that as part of your identity, as part of like as part of how you interact with the world. It's not, there's nothing that's like actually like quote unquote wrong about that. We're just talking, like, to me it's discussion about gender is more about like let's just lay out like what do these polarities look like, what is the range, like how do, because it's so, I think it's so important to just like emphasize that there is a polarity, and if most of us don't inhabit that
Yeah,
polarity.
exactly.
Right.
I agree with you. And I think that both of you make the point. So maybe I just want to bring, because I'm like loving the conversation and I'm happy that you agreed. Have you agreed to have more conversations with me? Was that an agreement? Great. So we can touch on that later, because I wanted to hear your stories, just because I think, and then maybe I'll share a little bit, because I think that then both of you are making a point, which I think it's a medicine. It's powerful for where we are in flat landing reality. You're saying, no, this is different. I feel this is different. So it's a feature, not a bug in me. And I'm willing to change my life upside down and go through something that's quite dramatic, because it's so important. So you're making, so that feels really powerful. It's a powerful teaching, and I'd love to understand how it unraveled for you both in different ways. Maybe Rachel, I know it's a massive question, and maybe
Yeah.
share whatever feels, you know, honoring and for you now, and then we can always revisit. But maybe, yeah, I'd love to know a little bit about it and where you are with it now, and then Aydan.
Sure. I'll tell a story. So yeah, like I wasn't like the, you know, the classic romantic case of like, I always knew that I should be this, and I prayed to God when I was 3 that that God would change my body. And you know what I mean? Like there are definitely people who have that like really intense early um identity orientation happening like that. Mine was more murky, I would say, for a long time. You know, I just spent a lot of years being like, I don't know why I feel like I don't fit in this weird way in society. Like it just doesn't feel right and nothing fixes it. And I got kind of sidetracked because of like Buddhist teachings of like suffering, actually. Like life is just like this. Life has an element of suffering. And, you know, of course, yes. But I sort of like didn't really pay attention to acutely, I guess, what it was. And then it became more clear over time, like, it's because I don't fit with the boys or the girls. Like it just, you know, there's something wrong here. And I kept being like, but I really want to like hang out with the girls and like go to coffee shops and talk and just be friends and go for walks and like just, you know what I mean? Like have this sort of like what I saw women doing, like at that the relational part just like was like, oh, this is like my heart, you know, this is like who I am. And I couldn't really like express it fully. I did like kind of like I began to sort of try to emulate like characters from like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, like the women in that show, like Willow and Tara, the witches, and I was all like enamored of them, you know, and like this stuff was happening, but it was all like, you know, definitely not trans though. Like this was like, oh, but no, I'm not a trans person. I just happen to have all the, you know, it's like very repressed, I would say. Um, and
How old were you
um,
in this like all this time?
this like began in puberty, like
Mhm.
around 16, and then like really took off in my 20s, I would say. And it just, yeah, it became like more, I guess I grew out of like needing to be like with the boys, you know, as a younger kid. And I was like, but I don't really want this. Like, you know, like I, you know, still have guy friends and like that's fine, but like there just was, I was just like selected wrong or something. So as I got into like my 30s, I still hadn't really come to terms with it, but there was this like one of my favorite events that happened like along the way was this woman who calls herself my old crone mentor. And you know, it's taught me like about herbalism and about bodywork therapy and just kind of like being like a really cool intuitive person. And she's like a green witch basically, and so she just picks up on things about people in all kinds of ways. But she invited me along on this retreat called the Path of the Grandmothers, which was like a weekend of yoga and massage. And we're just like hanging out and being and like, you know, like talking about whatever, with like 20 women. I think it was like 20 women and me basically. And so like, I was like, you know, I felt like so right in that setting. And like, um, you know, she had to explain to the group, well, you know, he's here for some masculine energy to like balance things out or whatever. And like my other older woman friend like leaned over to me and was like, she don't know you like I know you. Like they were all kind of like, it was kind of an inside joke, I guess, that they all shared unspoken truth, you know. And when I did transition, she said, you know, like it's about time. That was her first comment later. And she, you know, she's not like a politically younger, you know, radical anything. Like she's just this like hippie woman, like living on a farm and doing green herbalism stuff. So it was just cool to be seen like that by someone, which is super important. So I'm getting a little into the weeds, maybe, so to speak. But you know, at a certain point, I learned about the science actually around trans people from Robert Sapolsky, the biologist, like a little speech that he gave. Um, and a couple other things, and I got really interested in it. I was like talking to all these people. I remember like, hey, did you know that like trans people actually have different brains than like cis people, and that's why like they're trans, because they have the brains of the people that they identify as. And like, did you know that they like smell pheromones differently? Like that's really interesting. And just like this kind of stuff, you know, like again, like total projection. So it was really, I, you know, did a number on myself, or my culture did a number on me early on, so I wasn't able to realize myself in a deep way. And I'd also had like a really kind of profound mystical experience right before I woke up to the reality, which was sort of a like a sense of universal agape, compassion, generosity. And it felt like, you know, the sense of you know, being that tiny speck in the vast ocean and wanting to just and giving freely to the other specks in the ocean, like a mother like wiping her kid's nose, you know, just not even like you're not being like generous or whatever, you're just like doing it because it's your nature, right? And like that feeling of like wanting to be that, to do that and be that person was so strong, and I felt like blocked from that reality. You know, like John Vervaeke talks about this ontonormativity, where like something is more real than your normal life, and it's more right, you know, it's like calling to you, and that's what it felt like. So I think like those experiences sort of like combined to wake me up. And it just was like bright pain. It was like this bright blinding light of pain coming into my life from this like awkward darkness that had existed for so long. And it always felt like something, the pain took on like a collision, like sheet metal scraping, you know, together, or like a dull, like metallic thud. Like it always felt like metal, like the feeling of me was like a friction of dissonance, of like not fitting right and things clunking around and not, you know, running smoothly. And I was like, oh my God. And I like kind of was like, something is going on with my gender. So
Mm,
I went like pretty public with it right away. I was open about the process with people, like on social media as it was happening before I knew what was going on, because I felt like
mm,
this is a really important thing to document in real time and to interact with people. So I did that as long as I could stand it for.
mm,
And I guess I'm still doing it in a way, but there was an intense period of like, how long can I be this vulnerable as it's happening?
mm,
Um, and it took a while. It took me over a year to really come to terms with,
mm,
what that was. And then and I'll like maybe leave off, I'll just say this is like part one or something, but like,
mm,
um, it had felt in me like I had like a feminine core
mm,
to my being, like an essence, but maybe more of like a masculine sleeve to my being. Um, but then I also felt like I couldn't identify, I couldn't relate to the word woman. That was like
mm,
not something available to me. So I was like, how can that be? How can I be inwardly female, but I can't say woman? And
mm,
then it was like, oh, because I need to go through a process of becoming now. Like this was just the orientation. This isn't, my culture is telling me like, oh, you just say you're a woman and you're a woman now, and you
mm,
just, go get some lipstick and you're good, you
mm,
know, and get some hormones or whatever. And it was like, no, like actually this is an unresolved project that now needs work. And that was like where
mm,
aspirational philosophy, John Vervaeke, into Agnes Callard came in really handy to me, because Agnes Callard has this really cool philosophical model of aspiration
mm,
that I use for my own transition to become like a
mm,
better person. And
mm,
I saw that it could tie into a larger project of being a wiser, better person. I'm not saying I'm a wiser, better person, but I could see that creative energy coming. And I definitely
mm,
felt that I felt better, I performed better, people reacted to me better, I had more success in life. Like, all this stuff started
mm,
happening as the role fit, and that like sense of dysphoria, the mismatch, the friction and collision died down at the same time. So it was really like
mm,
much more of an evolving process of becoming like almost like a remedial developmental process in a
mm,
sense, which required a lot of training wheels, like aspirational goddesses and rituals done when I put on makeup and all kinds of stuff like that to really like enact it fully. And of course, the help of a community and like, like ritual practices like dressing up in drag and singing in a punk band and like stuff like
mm,
that, those were all kind of like little serious play moments for me. So
mm.
yeah, I'll just stop there because it's obviously a long and convoluted tale, but that's basically what got me to.
No, it's beautiful, and I'm so happy
um,
you shared. And I'd love to know, like, I'd love to hear from Aiden, but yeah, I'd love to know more about. It seems like from hearing you that it was like the turmoil, and it might be oversimplistic the statement, but it seems like the turmoil was much more before transition. Like the whole the what you're saying was not fitting, that sensation was really hard, but once you came to the decision, and of course there was the, like I see it as a birth process, so any birth is really hard. I mean, it takes a lot of you, but it seems less of a strain. Is that how you experience it? So since you,
yeah,
yeah.
like it was in the zone, in the you're just in the process now. Like you're in the birth canal, so you're just
Mm,
going for it,
mm,
whereas I guess before it was like as if I had this like nail in my foot or something that I didn't know about. And it was causing me all these, I was kind of like an asshole sometimes, and I was drinking a lot before transition, like I
mhm,
think 15 drinks a week, I would say, on average. And that's, I drink maybe one now. I don't even want to drink drink that much unless
mhm,
it's, really good craft beer or something. But like, yeah, it's like all that pain, like once it became recognized, and
mm,
then like that in itself dissipated a lot of it, and like it almost immediately, because
mhm,
I could find it. It's like going from anxiety to fear or something. Like it like focused it, into something that I was like, oh, here's the thing I can actually work on that makes sense, instead of like this ambient
hmm.
like unease with the world. So yeah, even with
Yeah.
all the trouble, with all the,
Mm,
you know, pain and, you know, I got discrimination. I definitely had my, you know, my job was threatened and other things happened. And I was betrayed a couple times by people, but you know, even with all of that and
mm,
difficulty with
mm,
relationships and
mm,
things, I've had a really good core of people, my spouse and my best friends, and you know, some
mm.
family members. Um, but it was still better. And that you hear this from trans people all the time. Like
Yeah.
they're like, you know, I would never trade this, even as hard as it's been, you know, even as much as I've lost, I would never go back, because that feeling of liberation is just so powerful. And there's a sense of like you're in tune with this magical energy all of a sudden for me, you know, like, and people say gender euphoria, but like it was like sparkling lights that I was like tracking, and I
Mm,
could like kind of feel as masculine and feminine kind of ebbed and flowed within me more, with more space for
mm,
them, like this sense of tuning into that. So I don't have like cycles. I do have, like I've told you before, both of you before, I have like some masculine side to me. Like I don't know
mm,
how much, but there's like a masculine moon and a
mm,
feminine
mm,
moon.
mm,
And I learned that the feminine moon over time was like the bigger of the moons or whatever, but like
mm,
learning to play with that was really like a core part of the freedom, and it's empowering. It's not just like now I'm free from something. It's like this is an active freedom. It's a sense of like now I have creative energy to work with,
mm.
rather than just like, you know, now it doesn't hurt anymore or something like that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I also I shared that with you before, but it's like with you when we have these conversations, you often remind me. I mean, now I'm so immersed in the work that I'm kind of reminded myself, but a lot of I just spent like days with female friends. I don't do that often, but I did it to celebrate a friend's birthday. And I was just noticing the ways. There's something about the ways of women, and this group. It was just is different than being with a bunch of my male friends. It's just and the fact that we um have created a reality that saying that is bad is it's
Yeah.
just upsetting because it's not it's not true. First, because it's
Yeah.
not
That's
true. It's and you remind me of that because when you say I don't know, you said something the first time we met. You said something like, oh, I would look at women and just go like, oh, like I wanted to be doing those things. And I was like, I never had that thought. Like, so
mm,
you
mhm.
remind me of how um because when you were swimming in the energy, I had nothing to compare. And at times I compare with something even like annoying. So it's almost like you bring the beauty, like you remind me of the beauty in the relationality, in the um yeah, there is a mode of conversing with my female friends, especially the ones that are not interested. So not the ones that have the type of mind that enjoy being on Greg's listserv or talking to John Viveki,
Mm.
the ones that don't do that, the ones that actually are making lunch boxes for the children and caring for the land or whatever it is, and they have no interest in the other bits. So these friends, I um I go like, um, there is a certain pathway of conversing that is certainly very different than the pathway of conversation in different spaces. And, you know, it ties in with all the things that we said before. But yeah, you remind me
Yeah.
of that. You remind me of the sacredness of that, or the beauty, or the yeah, of all of that.
Yeah. It's like the core to me, you know, of what transition was about for me, that relational part, and just,
Mm,
oh, it's so good. It's so much my heart, you know, and
mm,
that's why, you know, yeah, like I love guys. I love talking to guys. I have more sympathy for guys now than I did before. Like I kind of like, you
mm,
know, see them as like, oh, like I know what you go through in
mhm,
some ways, you know.
mm.
Um, and often they're refreshingly simple, like not, you know, simple, but like the line, right? Like it's like,
Yeah,
oh, direct, and like we're gonna
yeah,
solve these problems and get
yeah.
shit done and great. And like you know, us like a group of us women are like, oh, I don't know, but what about this? I'm kind of worried about this thing. And like, what about, you know, like we can get kind of a little bit lost sometimes and
Yeah.
all that tangled up. So it's, yeah, it's a really, it's just a beautiful dynamic. I don't want to lose it. I think it's really like radical to say like, let's get rid of gender and like, you know, like trans people are considered radical, but like we're talking about something that's ancient into like
Mm-hmm.
primates, you know, into other primates. And like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like gender to me is like such a potentially beautiful thing. And just because it's been sort of crushed out of us for various reasons,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean we shouldn't try to like revive it.
That's beautiful. Love to hear your a little bit of your journey, Aiden. If you're
All right. Um, so I grew up in a very traditional, devout Mormon household. I was the youngest of five kids,
mm-hmm.
and so it was a very gendered kind of upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
Mormons are a very like it's a very traditional, family oriented religion
Mm-hmm.
that has like there's can't remember the technical term for the document, but there's basically this document that I remember being framed on the wall in our house that had much to do with talking about how, you know, the woman has this role, the man has this role, they make a family together, you know, it kind of lays things out very, very specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, so my mom, she's amazing. We had a lot of we've gone through a lot through the last few years, but I'm just gonna like preface this whole story by saying I love my mom, and she's been like one of the she's been very surprising to me over
Mm-hmm.
the years, and I'm just I think she's such a good example of what it means to love your child. Anyways, so I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to preface this by saying that just so everybody knows. But yeah, there's a point, you know, when I was growing up, everything was kind of like gendered when it came
Mm-hmm.
to like church activities. Like we would have some parts of the meetings where it would be everyone together, and somewhere it would be like, you know, just the girls, the young girls together. The young boys are together in another room, and
Mm-hmm.
you know you learn different lessons for part of your time. We had different events that were gendered, so there
Mm-hmm.
was I was always like in these groups with
Mm-hmm.
girls, and it's confusing. It's like I'm listening to the both of you discuss kind of like the beauty of like these female groups and everything. And
Mm-hmm.
man, I was a part of that. Like I was a
Mm-hmm.
part of that growing up. And what's funny to like hear you talking about it is that like I would say that it's very complicated when it comes to going from like that, like being nested in something like that, and then transitioning to being perceived as a man,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to having that kind of like shift in my life. So it's definitely just I'm not really like going through my story in
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
chronological order or anything, but
Mm-hmm.
like for
Mm-hmm.
me that's like the you know Rachel and I were just talking about the idea of sacrifice and the idea of, you know, like kind of grieving as
Mm-hmm.
part of the process of transformation. And it's part of what part of what I would say is like it's given me such a strong sense of the importance of feminine relationships. And for me, like one of the things that I think might be somewhat surprising for people who don't know a lot of trans people to know
Mm-hmm.
is that like for me like part of transitioning was like the acceptance and the acknowledgement of what I was giving up, that there
Mm-hmm.
was something to give up, that they, you know, until there's
Mm-hmm.
part of me that felt like until I really understood that I couldn't even really like
Mm-hmm.
that was part of the getting cognitively getting to the point where I could like even wrap my head around it. And so you know I definitely like felt a shift in the relationships that I had,
Mm-hmm.
um, which isn't necessarily bad. Like it's not like it's bad. It's just it's
mm,
different now. But yeah, you know, growing up, being in like we had girls camp. I was, you
mm,
know, in with all the girls. It's a fantastic kind of like experience to have, and
mm,
um, definitely like I think it's definitely the biggest loss that I feel out of
mm.
anything from transition.
The relation, that belonging,
The
that
belonging, like that,
mm,
because it's a certain level of acceptance.
yeah, okay.
You know, like
Mm,
I'm still there, like I still feel connected in a way,
mm,
you know, just because of that foundation of like those
mm,
early experiences. I think I have
mm,
like more access to have
mm,
like dynamic, intimate relationships with women without it being necessarily like
mm,
sexually charged or anything
mm,
like
mm,
that.
mm.
And I think that like it's just unfortunate because the thing that changed was how I was perceived,
Yeah.
right? More than
Mm-hmm.
anything, like that was the thing that was changed. So like, and there's a certain point where like I have to respect that shift.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So I would
Yeah.
never, like, I would never impose myself on an all women environment because it just wouldn't. For me, like I'm being perceived in this way now that is like actually more authentic to how I felt.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even
Mm-hmm.
if I didn't
Mm-hmm.
recognize it when I was
Mm-hmm.
younger.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, just kind of returning back to my story, it was all kind of like very vague for me, and I did kind of you know there was like a sexuality element to it for me
Mm-hmm.
as well, which was very like it's very confusing
Mm-hmm.
when like for me being bisexual, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have like the signposts along
Mm-hmm.
the way, you know, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. Like I
Yeah.
yeah, it makes it way more complicated because you're like I would I the best way for me to put it is I was, you know, I had a few boyfriends when I was in high school and I
Mm-hmm.
remember like being sexually attracted to them
Mm-hmm.
and like and you know all of those signals were there,
Mm-hmm.
but it's interesting like in this context and everything, it, I couldn't accept the way that they were trying to be with me. There was like it was like
Mm-hmm.
what was coming back at me, I was like this doesn't feel right. Like I couldn't connect with it at all. You know,
Mm-hmm.
whereas with like the women that I was or girls at the time I was attracted to, I was like it just felt natural. Like I was just and so it was confusing in the reverse way, right? Because I was like, oh, we're really good friends, but I'm getting jealous of them being really good friends with somebody. Like it was like there was weird things that would kind of percolate up out of these
Mm-hmm.
experiences where I was
You would
like
be jealous of the way that people were uh acting towards a man, or is that no?
no.
Oh.
It was a jealousy of it was the jealousy of like I would have a really good friend who is a girl,
Mm-hmm.
and I would start recognizing that I had jealous feelings about like their intimacy with other people. Like I was
Mm-hmm.
like because I wanted like because it was like in
Mm-hmm.
reality the way that I interpret it now, the reality is like I just wanted them to be my girlfriends. Like in some
Mm-hmm.
cases, like
Mm-hmm.
there were times when that was the dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's
Mm-hmm.
very anyways, so
Mm-hmm.
I definitely had a lot of baggage when it came to just feeling like something because in that context I'm religious. I think this is something that's wrong with me. Either way,
Mm-hmm.
no matter where it's coming from, I just felt that there was something wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so it definitely weighed on me heavily. When I left, so I left home to go to college and moved, you know, halfway across the country. I grew up in California. I moved to the Midwest, and when basically within a few weeks after my second semester away at college, I had a friend who was in the dorm. I was in an all girls dorm, and we got into this long, meandering conversation one night. And at one point, she just like, you know, I think like we had gotten in the topic of like dating and relationships. And you have to think, I'm this Mormon girl in this moment. She turns to me, she's like, you know, it's interesting. When I first met you, I got the distinct impression that you were a lesbian. And she says this to me, and I was like, I kind of sat with it for a minute,
Mm-hmm.
and I just said, and it just popped. I was like, yeah, I think I'm bisexual. Like I just kind of just came out then. And and really, like, my initial reaction was like, I'm gonna go tell the bishop. I'm gonna go, like, I'm basically like, I'm gonna do the thing and like
Mm,
take care of
mm,
this problem.
mm,
And and it was just like, ugh, this terrible, like, I had a few days where it was just
mm,
like I could be sick to my stomach. I was so anxious and upset about what was going on. And I had a follow-up conversation with the same friend, and
mm,
basically she was like, well, have you ever considered, like, maybe they're wrong? And it was like a total shift for me. Like,
mm,
I was like, completely faithful before then, like, as far as like I believed in that church and all of
mm,
that. And then
mm,
after that, it was just like, yeah, I think I should stop going. Like, I think the response was basically, I think I should stop going to church.
mm.
And
Wow. Mm,
so so essentially I had to kind of like do this without telling my family. So I went through the process of coming out at school.
so
And
first was coming out as still as a woman, so you hadn't considered
yeah,
the other, and but
yeah,
just
not at all.
breaking up with the religion, all of that on your own without the family, which must have been really hard, I imagine. Like
Oh
really,
yeah,
yeah.
it was very, very difficult. So like it was I mean, a huge struggle. And I definitely like I should probably speed up the story a bit. So basically, pretty early on after I came out, I had a like, within a few years of that, I went to the drag show night at our college. And it was so it's so vibrant for me still. Like, I can still remember, like I did like the silliest attempt at being androgynous. Like, I just like put on some baggy pants, and I like put on a sports bra and
Mhm.
like a baggy shirt, and I did my hair different, and it was just like, I felt so alive. Like, I felt so in my body. I felt so sexy. Like, I felt so like, it just was so right.
Mm,
Um, I literally started dressing there. Like, I changed my wardrobe like right
mm,
away. Um, and what's interesting though is just to note, as a side note,
mm,
even after that point, like, I had multiple instances where I realized that my own kind of perception, or my own like yeah, my own perception of like what I was projecting in the world was actually way more masculine than what people were perceiving of me.
mm,
Even so, like, I
Mm.
kind of had this continual like I had this like silly, like, mid 20s, or early 20s, actually early 20s, affair with this Italian woman when I was in Germany. And so it was just kind of like this cross-cultural
mm,
experience for me, where like we're kind of like doing this language program for a month. And at one point she was like, oh, like, I thought you were way more feminine when I first met you. Like, she made a point of saying, like, she thought
mm,
that I was way more feminine, then got to know me better and realized like my masculinity. Anyways,
mm,
um,
mm,
yeah, I started realizing there was something about my gender that was different. But there's so much room
mm,
for lesbians to be, or women who are attracted to
mm,
women, to present as masculine, that like
mhm,
there's a lot of room to play around with your presentation without having to adopt like anything different as your identity. And so I think that there's like
mm,
some element to the flexibility of women's presentation in culture, you know, not some cultures, but in some cultures today, like, it's just like, whatever, anything goes, don't care. Like,
mhm,
it's not a signal of like you being feminine or not, honestly. Like, there's
mhm.
a lot of wiggle room there.
Yeah.
And yeah, but it wasn't until like, it basically was just something that continued to gnaw on me over the years. Like, I just had a sense that something was different about like how I was inhabiting my body.
Mm.
um,
Is it the
it
way
wasn't
that the because in that at that time you're already dressing more masculine,
yeah,
and but the reflection that reality would give back to you still wasn't like
yeah,
like how you felt or something.
yeah, yeah. I mean, up to the point where like I would say within a few months of me actually coming out as trans,
Mm,
I had a coworker. It was like, you know, we're at the brewery, we're hanging out, and this coworker of mine, she starts talking to my wife about bras,
mm,
right? She starts talking to my wife about bras. Just came up. So like she's talking about bras and she's talking about how my wife could get a different bra, and then she turns to me and
mm.
starts talking to me about my bras. And my wife, my wife literally, I hadn't even said this to my wife yet, right?
Mm.
Like this has come up in conversation, but my wife literally stops her and she's like, Aiden is trans. Like had to stop her and just be like, this is not the this is not the right person to talk to about this.
Wow.
So there was this
Mm,
reality that like, in so my wife and I got married in 2015,
mm,
and we got married as two women, and it
mm,
was like this whole big thing because literally we got married a week before it was made legal in the entire United States, like to
mm,
recognize gay marriage. So it was just like this beautiful thing that we got to
mm,
participate in, and yeah, like ahead of the us getting married, we did have a conversation where basically it was like let's get real here, is this something she wanted to know if it was possible that
mm.
I would consider transitioning. And so we had a very frank conversation about it before we got married, and it
How
was
did how
yeah,
did I don't know if you mind speaking about it, and maybe I'm just more concerned for your times, but can I stay a little bit, like 10 more minutes, just or 50 for us to wrap it up, or because I
sure, sure,
yeah, are
just
you okay to, um or a little bit longer even? It's more because it's yeah, I was under the assumption we were gonna stay until my 1 p.m., which is now, but it feels like we need to go a little bit more. I'm curious about this because she was attracted to you as a woman, or not necessarily? Like she was attracted to your soul, or in that particular
yeah.
relationship, because when it transitions, like the agreements
Mm-hmm.
shift, right? There's different agreements, and the way that people would be with you, or be with, like, there's
Yeah,
she's in your process with you at that
yeah,
moment.
yeah, it's interesting. I think like I don't think it's a coincidence that one of her best friends from high school is non-binary.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something that she's just kind of been aware of and in contact with since she was very young. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they didn't come out until very,
Mm-hmm.
basically a few years before I came out. They came out. So but I think that I think there's a way that although and this is interesting to note, like although she does identify as a lesbian, that
Mm-hmm.
this is something that works for us because we work, um and it is kind of like
Mm-hmm.
I think for us there's like there's two kind of elements that have made it difficult. um One is that we actually liked being queer
Mm-hmm.
in public, like we like to be identified as queer people. And like as funny as that might sound to somebody who's like to anyone who's like not queer, like there's something about it that's
Mm,
just,
mm, mm,
I'm not, because there's like you're like in this, and this might sound like a flippant way or like a superficial way of looking at it, but you're in this club, like you see each other, you
mhm,
recognize each other, you're safe, you know
mhm,
like I
mhm,
like that sense, and she
mhm,
likes it too. And so it's kind of like we had to almost like mourn this
mhm,
this like sense of a queer identity that like we had previously. And and what's the other thing? So the other part of it is just really like I am different.
mm,
I'm different, and I can't, it's unfortunate that it can't just be like simple and smooth or anything, but I am that pragmatic person now. Like I am way more
mm.
edgy, like I
Oh, you're saying
want
that with your transition, you were different with her. There's a different component that's come
yeah,
out.
there's a different component because it's not, because Yeah, I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
hormones do things. They do
Mm-hmm.
things. Like there's changes that happen. So
And I imagine by also the hormones do things, but also I imagine that by then being seen in a certain way and reacted to in a certain way, and then like the hormones, the relationality with life starts,
mm,
like the new pathways that you start inhabiting are different, and therefore because even as you said, I had to mourn being queer. I was just like fascinated by it. Oh my god, I'm so happy you guys are gonna have more conversations with me, because I was like, that is fascinating, because I'm not queer, and I'm deeply attracted to color in life, like, and I mean color in the vastest way possible, and
mm,
therefore this
Mhm.
project like
yeah,
and I understand what you mean by that, because sometimes being a monogamous white woman, whatever it is that I am inhabiting, might be perceived in certain ways. So therefore, I am in a certain track of
mm,
potentially less color, less like, you know what I mean? Less like, I can imagine that going to a queer meeting, there's some allowances and affordances
mm,
that therefore are not in a certain way of relating. I think that we are going as humanity towards more of that, and it's really clumsy, and we're training wheels, and we probably need the training wheels for like 20 more years, because we're making some generalizations that are not good for us as humans, I think.
mm,
But I also want to say that I hadn't thought of that, but as I heard you saying, I was like, oh, I almost like mourn being like, like I was inhabiting your share and going like,
yeah,
I never experienced that in that way.
yeah,
And I imagine what it would have
Mhm.
been to experience it and then become seen as not queer. But you are,
mhm,
but you're not, but you know what I mean? Like, so then you have the color, but now the
Mhm.
color is veiled from the world. And then you
yeah,
have to kind of be
yeah.
more, yeah, it's weird. It's interesting.
It's complex because like you know, this is going back to that this is there's a give and take here. There's a trade-off here,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and so as much as like I feel better inhabited in my body, that I
Mm-hmm.
feel more at ease with kind of the just like the day to day in many ways. Like there's still just these things that like I had to accept that I'm going to be perceived as a straight white dude, and
Mm-hmm.
like, and so that it's like uh yeah, there's something about that
Mm,
that definitely, like, I don't know. I've serious like it makes you start wondering like, how can I make myself look more queer? Like literally, like
mm,
I'll have these thoughts where I'm like, what can I do to just
mm.
like throw it out in the world, like more obviously, just which
Queer
is,
vibes. Yeah.
yeah, like I don't know how I it's funny
Mm.
because I feel like it probably is counterintuitive to most people who haven't been a part of that kind of community before.
Wow,
Um,
that's very
yeah.
enlightening. Like very like I really struggle with words, because when there's so much fullness to a conversation, like I've been experiencing, it's like the words don't fit. And I feel that that's what I mean when I say that we're like 20, 30 years or even more, like to catch up with all these nuances that are being expressed. And like I loved how you shared, and I also picked up on that in different ways, Rachel. And I'd love to at another conversation hear from you, because it does feel different, the transition from both of you are trans, and the grievances seem to have been different grievances, and so it's all
Yeah.
fascinating to me, as opposed to be put in a box of so simplistic, like trans people or whatever it is. It feels like it misses, it speaks to one element for sure, that you had some things in common that feels really important to honor, and but then you have all of other things that actually maybe I'll identify more with Rachel, and then in some elements I'll identify, like, that you speak to, like I was I have learned from life more. My experience of childhood are like yours, Aydan, so therefore there's some memories, in the memory perspective we'll have
Mhm.
shared different things that informed how I perceive certain things. And even what I get annoyed by, which might be different to Rachel, that had more of aspirational relationship to the feminine, but then there's a something that you perceive that I think is lost in me because I was brought up with it. You know, like there's all these different ways it shows up, I suppose.
For
Yeah,
real. Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
like I just, yeah, like I'm also, yeah, reflecting off of Aiden's journey as like that. Aiden called it uncanny at one point, just because we're like
The valley.
seeing each other in these weird mirrors, you know, they're like reversed, but like not all reversed, but like just so strange. Like the sexuality piece is really like very similar to me too. I didn't get into that, but like, you know, I'd like initially identified as bi, but it took me a long time because the way that I related sexually to, you know, either males or females didn't like work right for me. Like it didn't fit. Like the things that I wanted to do with girls were not what they wanted to do. And with, you know what I mean? It just like didn't make sense. So like, um, and like all these other things that were just like, yeah, like somewhat the same and somewhat different. And like with you, Adriana, just like these like fascinating, like I feel like, you know, like for me, like, yeah, I maybe like I'm like have like this aspirational spirit of femininity in some ways. And I feel like you have this like soul of femininity in other ways that I'm just like, oh yeah, that's it though. That's like, you know what I mean? Like the sense of I don't know. There's like there are other aspects of it that are like I don't want to get all like, you know, earthy or whatever, like, you know, earth mama kind of stuff, but like sort of like that, you know, just like um and in some way I guess you can almost can't know it if you are just it. Like I'm forgetting too now as I'm getting farther into the process, like what it was like to not be like this. And I think it's good that we're documenting because for me even because I won't remember like I am now I'm like, oh yeah, you know, guys, they're like so cool and they're like, you know, like because now they're like the other for me. And I would, you know, never want to go back, but like you know what I mean? It's just like the memory fades as your identity changes, your whole, you know, narrative, ego, everything shifts over and you don't it's like your perspective can't even remember what it was like to be the other.
Yeah, there's a weird like that's actually we obviously don't have time to like delve into this, but the memory thing is definitely interesting. Like that like as time progresses, because it's been over 5 years for me now that I've been on testosterone, and like as that time has gone on and on and on, I'm like, wow, like it is hard to think of like my wife even like she'll mention this too, like it's like weird for her to think of me as being a woman, like you know like this is like this history that I have that like it's over time, yeah, that transition, I mean, and I guess that's like a positive sign in many ways that you're kind of like moving into this new reality, this new, you know, identification, ego. um but yeah, I think that there's I think that's one of the things that I would hope for trans people generally is to like figure out like how do we honor that past while still honoring like the truth of who we are now. Like this is one of those things that like to
It's
me
beautiful.
the rejection of that past is actually a hindrance to the process of transition, and deeply um it disrupts integration, like for somebody you can't be fully integrated if you can't find some level of acceptance of that past and that reality of what you went through. So like
And
honoring
that's, I'd even add that that's your gift to the world. It's that past and who you are now, because
right.
I don't have that past with that distinction, and it's so illuminating. It's like it's it's a gift, truly. It's like you can open each other's psyche and go like, oh, I didn't know that, and then we've done that a few times this time. And imagine if instead of fighting with one another, and I want to honor that because there's so much, I mean, next conversation maybe we can go into different bits of it, but there's so much pain just in human life in general that I can see how people can be not generous to one another, you know, just like, I'm struggling too, you shut up or whatever. But if we open ourselves up and go and put our awe goggles, like John Vivek says, or it's just really fascinating to me, because the amount I'm gonna actually watch this, because I will, like, not just be here, but watch it, because when I watch it, I'm so in this experience that I'm sure I missed some bits, and I want to listen to it with more awareness, to go like, oh, I want to expand on here, because it's fascinating. And the way that you described about your past, and the grieving of that you had to let go of, both of you, and in different ways, and what you're celebrating in the future. I mean, this is like, it makes your history and what you can give to humanity so unique. It's so unique, and I feel it's a shame if you, like, pretend you just want to be a normal guy that has never been a woman, or vice versa, because actually, and I see a lot of trans women wanting to do that, and I also understand why, because we're in this place in history in which we don't really accept the different. But unfortunately, we all miss out, because actually it makes you a very unique kind of woman, and we need to understand what it is. You can actually remind us of the feminine, because we have forgotten it. And I saw that with you too, Aydan, in a very fascinating way. Both of you have reminded me, like, fleshed out more elements of the feminine, because when you're in it, and I was just sharing, I think I was sharing with, I don't remember which guy. I say that respectfully, because I started my conversations more with men. And I was trying to describe that when you are cyclical, like, and it's really tricky, it's just landing to me much more so now, actually getting clarity, not only inhabiting this way and not having this way seen. So in some ways we all relate to that here, like trans, but I'm saying being menstrual, like having the cycle as like something that is the way I see reality, is from these different perspectives. There's no linear, but I have indoctrinated myself that I was linear. So then there is a thing that rubs, and I experienced the same kind of, not the same, but I experienced the relaxation that both of you were sharing. That when I tell women, like, you're cyclical, and they're like, holy fuck, like, I can't believe it, oh my god, because we have done something to our psyches in which we have othered any other part of the cycle, as unless it's ovulation or pre-ovulation. Like, you have to be, like, basically patriarchy is like just condones estrogen behavior, or a behavior for a woman, not for a man, but for a woman, that she has capacity to accommodate. So during estrogen, like, she accommodates reality, right? So she's accommodating being aligned. So she's like, okay, I'll be aligned. And then the other times of the cycle, she's fighting with the line, because she's like, I'm not aligned, and then she has less estrogen, so she's not accommodating. And then society said, oh, that's bad, no, that's PMS, we don't like that one, but we like this one. And then women have these like split things. So in one way, what I saw, so what I'm like speaking for is the grieving, is like a society that can be with grief, that can be with letting go, that can be with change, which is everything that you're good at being with. Like, I say inverted commas, because good at being with doesn't make it easy. I'm not saying it's easy. Like, to grieve is always grieving, to be in pain is always to be in pain, and to be okay with change doesn't mean that it's not painfully hard. But the teaching of the cycle is to die to yourself every month, and to be okay with pain. Like your life includes pain, and not masking it, and being with. So I see, like, both of you in a very it's quite trippy way in which you mirrored the teachings of the cycle,
Yeah, the the thing. This is awesome. The thing that Rachel and I had talked about before is like the idea of crossing this valley from opposite sides. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's really like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so you've been on the one side
Mm-hmm.
for your whole life, which a lot, which really, like, you're bringing something to this very rich to the conversation too,
Mm-hmm.
because of that. And
Mhm.
from that perspective, you know, that's an anchor, I think, for this conversation. I think that you can very well act as an anchor for this conversation, to be able to unfold in a way that like really honors like all of these different angles
Mhm.
that we're gonna attempt to share along the way.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my
Great
God.
talking with you.
Any final words, or just opening for final words, and then yes, to future conversations. So to whoever is listening or watching, to start with, you'll be watching. There'll be more of these, and because I'm going to launch this with a Substack, I actually want to invite people to participate in. That's something also with the feminine, the relational. I don't feel so drawn to just broadcasting, but I feel really drawn to like inviting people to be in generosity of spirit and engaging in like, I'm curious about this, could you explore more of this, or I'm interested in knowing this. And that it could become like an educational component, because you know, in some ways I feel that I hope we can bring insights into people's life experiences.
Yeah. That's so cool. You guys are like so fucking cool. Seriously. Like, I just have to say that. Like, this is
Oh,
just, it's amazing. Like, this is exactly the kind of conversation, you know, and other people coming into it and offering, you know, whatever their little, you know, their slice of it is too. Like, it's just such a like needed thing to be able to provide that space. So this whole project, Adriana, is just like, it's just fire, as my kids were saying about a year ago. I guess they don't say that anymore.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
well,
really fantastic. Thank you.
everybody feeling complete for now. So thank you very much. Big hugs, big love to you both. And yeah, we'll be in touch for the next one.